Welcome to Café of Delights, conversations that enlighten and inspire with me, your host, Gale West. We are at the precipice of one of the most exciting evolutions in human history, from science to spirituality, culture, arts, cutting-edge psychotherapies, new economies, and more. We will explore how to create a world where all can thrive. In a series of riveting interviews, you'll have the opportunity to hear from those that are actively working at the edges of local, regional, and global transformation. Join me, your host and author of the book, Money Come Dance With Me, Gale West, to be inspired, delighted, and filled with hope for a new reality. Café of Delights starts now. Welcome to the Café of Delights. I'm your host, Gale West, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Patrick MacManaway as my guest today. I heard Patrick speak at the Dowsing Convention last year. He was a keynote speaker, and I was so enamored with his message that I had to have him on the Café of Delights, and he's here with us today. So Dr. Patrick MacManaway is a third-generation practitioner of psychic and healing arts, working with land energies and the intelligence of elemental and nature spirits to heal, bless, and enhance domestic, commercial, and agricultural properties. Past president of the British Society of Dowsers, he holds a degree in medicine and teaches and consults on sites in the UK, US, Australia, and around the world online. Welcome, Patrick. So happy to have you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. And thank you for inviting me into the Café of Delights.
Well, so since it's a Café of Delights, what I ask people is what is delighting you at this time and what brings you hope for the world?
Most important question, and thank you always for asking that one, Gail. I understand that the universe responds to whatever we project, based on our extraordinary arrangement of free will with universal mind. And so when we project love and gratitude and grace, optimism and joy, then truly that is what fills our life and our space and our community and the world around us. And so the understanding of our authorship of that and our potential and power, the superpower of a human being, I think, is to spread love in the world. And so that truly gives me hope and delight, and I think is perhaps one of the most important things for you and I and our listeners today to remember. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed, vulnerable, victimized by circumstances, but just to remember that truly we have an arrangement with the universe that we fill it with whatever we project. And so our superpower of filling the world with love, I think, is our main project here.
Yeah, and we're more powerful than we know.
It can be almost intimidating. The universe listens and responds to our every thought. So skillful thinking is the project.
Yeah, skillful thinking. Yeah, thinking. So I'm curious about your origin story. So I know you're a medical doctor, and yet your primary work is working with land and animal spirits and elementals and healing cities. I can't wait to hear that for our listeners to hear some of your stories. But how did you get from a medical degree to where you are today? And I know you have a family history of this, so let our listeners know more about your origin story, because I think it's very curious.
Origin story is really a story of my family's work, Gail. Both of my parents were instinctive and natural healers. Mum from birth was the girl who you brought your sick animal or your sore shoulder or hurting head to, and she would put her hands on and fix you up. Dad, his mum was a psychic. He was a military officer, and discovered in a rather miraculous way, honestly, a gift of healing age 19 whilst fighting the rearguard action at Dunkirk while British soldiers were evacuated from the beaches there.
He was in
Compelled
Dunkirk?
He was compelled to put his hands on wounded soldiers in the absence of any medical support or
Whoa.
potential to evacuate. Put his hands on people, stopped pain, stopped bleeding, kept them from going into a shock state, which is the primary end of life for wounded soldiers. I think, frankly, blew his mind and changed his life, and he devoted his rest of his life to pursuing the healing arts based on that profound experience. And together in 1959, they set up a healing teaching center in rural Scotland to cultivate and develop people's natural gifts of healing and mediumship. And so I was born into that very rich matrix, and it was early in the day of what we would consider now the flourishing of things that we're interested in. And we literally had gurus for lunch and lamas for dinner, and full-time students and a whole healing buzz going on. And so I was very enamored and absorbed with that, and trained with them, and wanted to have my life be about that. They were working with people and animals and places, and my interest evolved into working mostly with places, because I like to be out of doors rather than sat in front of a computer screen as we are now, but I can tolerate it for an hour's chat. So they recommended I get a conventional medical training just to get savvy to healing practices, many and various, and not be on one side of any fence, but really understand both holistic and allopathic, and in whatever way was best to put them together. So the medical degree was a stepping stone, and once I got my basic license, I had a retirement party and spent another 2-3 years training in landscape practices that I've continued since, and joined in the family's practice on that basis. So there was no conversion really from medical to holistic. It was just a stepping stone along the way for me, which I thoroughly enjoyed and appreciated the training hugely, and many experiences arising from the privilege of being in that role for people.
So how is that informed? So you have the history of your childhood, which is absolutely amazing that you're sharing, and then you had the medical degree, and how have they kind of informed each other in the work you're doing, or not?
Yes. I think sort of generically, Gale, as a vocational healer, I'm looking at what can make a system healthy, what can make a system optimized. And so regardless of our protocol or approach or our training, we're all really looking at the same thing: is what does health actually look like, and how do we achieve that? It's easy, and particularly the conventional medical field, so-called, not really conventional, but has gained that title, and our culture can get absorbed by a focus on what's wrong, diagnosis of pathology, and whether that's a pathology of human physiology or cultural attitude, or thinking. We can get very absorbed and focused on what's wrong here, what's negative, what needs to be fixed. I think because of our contract of free will, the power the mind is to focus on what's health look like, individually, collectively, what attitudes, behaviors bring about health, dynamic optimization, vibrancy, grace into a system. And so whatever training we have, medical, chiropractic, Reiki, acupuncture, we're all really on the same project. Psychology, ecology, what does health look like? What can we do to enhance, optimize, and bring right relationship, self to self, self to other, self to community, self to planet. So I think any deep study of a system's health dynamic really is informing, as long as we can focus and stay with the generics and not get too distracted into the particular of any one protocol or mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's about looking at health as a whole. I love this question: what does health look like? And so looking at it from the micro system to the macro system, it's all about a system, right?
I think when we take a systems approach, then we get to see the forest as well as the trees. Mm-hmm. And Gale, if I may, just in terms of looking at the forest, to share with everybody listening here, I think biggest picture, my perspective, I think there's only two cultural paradigms or attitudes or beliefs really that are holding us back as a Western culture. When we compare, for example, with my agricultural work, we've had in Europe 6,500 years of sustainable agricultural practices, and we've had close now 100 years of ecocide, frankly. But the sustainable practices are not new. They're very well worn and well understood. And so when we look deeply into what's the difference between a culture that's in full sustainability and a state of dynamic health versus one that's consuming its environment and consuming itself, two things, I think. The first is our relationship with time, and the second is our relationship with environment. And in terms of time, sustainable thinking, sustainable cultures think of time as a circular process, which is what farmers do. It isn't a surprise that Christmas comes every year. We get stressed about whether we've got our Christmas shopping done every year, but frankly, it's not a surprise. It's gonna happen every year, and we can either be shocked and surprised about it, or we can be in advance about it. Actually, to my detriment, I'm normally last minute in a panic, but I know that's going to happen. So, but in a circular system, it's going to be spring every year. We're going to plant wheat, we're going to plant corn, and the question is, can we anticipate? Can we be with the natural flow and cycle? Can we surf the waves of time and energy in space time and take that to our advantage? Our culture, and including and particularly, in a financial setting, which is where you apply your own superpowers to sort this part of people's thinking out. Once we go on to linear time, our belief is that it's going to be better later on, and so we defer, and we're going to have more wealth, more power. We're going to be sexier, somehow we're going to be younger. I don't know how that works, but it's going to be better then. And so we pursue a linear consciousness, and we leave the present behind in our minds. Whereas in a circular consciousness, we're always going to be here again, and we're always going to be now again. And in a linear consciousness, and in a financial sense, we look at the economies of nations, and they measure their health in terms of growth.
Yeah.
And so a healthy economy is one that's growing indefinitely, and the healthier it is, the faster it's growing. I know from my medical training, we've got a word for that, and the word is cancer. If something is eternally growing outside of the system's capacity to hold it, it becomes cancerous. And so when we move on to linear time and apply that to our economies, we literally have an endless and unstoppable resource consumption, because we assume that health means growth and expansion beyond a system's capacity to naturally sustain itself. So that's one aspect, I think, profoundly, is our thinking about time. Perhaps in truth, time is a spiral, but it has circularity within it. And once we accept and understand and work with the circularity as surfers in a wave or dancers in a dance, endlessly repeating, being better every time the same thing comes around, expansion, contraction, spring, summer, winter, seeds grow, seeds fall, replant, seeds grow, seeds fall. Sustainable cultures think in circular time. And then the second thing, which is what I mostly work with, is that sustainable cultures understand and have very real, not conceptual, but very real relationship with the intelligence around them. The intelligence of the elemental world, the intelligence of nature, spirit world, the intelligence of the angelic world, what my dad used to call the celestial civil service. Bless him, as a military officer, his mind was very black and white. And so there was a celestial being responsible for every part of the universe. And if there was trouble anywhere, you just address and approached said celestial being, and through dialogue and proceeding with according guidance, fixed it up. So, and we'll share stories, I think, as this interview goes along, just to substantiate that. But if we think of our environment as inanimate and non-cognitive, non-responsive and unintelligent, then we are inclined to exploit it for our own whims, desires, satiate our own insecurities or greed. Insecurities, being the fundament of greed. Once we recognize truly that we're actually in relationship with a dynamic, intelligent, vastly intelligent system around us, then we simply approach and relate to it in a very different way. And we are typically in a state of humility, respect, and frankly, awe. And we fit ourselves inside of those natural processes in a way that both sustains us without compromising them. So just those 2 points, I think, are salient and probably, the most important things that I can possibly share in terms of, the delight that we can bring into the world, is to move our minds into circular time and to deeply engage with, not just talk about the intelligence of the universe, but to talk with the intelligence of the universe and to pay close attention to what she has to say.
Whoa, that's incredibly exciting. We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, Patrick, I'd love for you to share with us some of stories of your connection to the universe, and like how we can begin to connect to those beings and those elementals. I've been doing it for many, many years, and it's really exciting.
An old hand at this, Grace. Where I'm talking to the choir here.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, this is Gale West, and this is a Cafe of Delights. I'm your host, and I am with Dr. Patrick MacManaway, and we'll be back in a moment.
Imagine if you were truly flourishing, how would your financial expansion impact the world? Author of Money Come Dance With Me, Gale West is an internationally known speaker, creative catalyst, and business intuitive at Success with Soul. Work with Gale to create a new relationship with money as your friend. Link the soul of your business to the business of your soul with programs like Sacred Money Mastery, Akashic Records of the Soul, and more. To receive a healing money meditation, go to successwithsoul.com today.
Cafe of Delight. Conversations that enlighten and inspire with me, your host, Gale West. Tune into transformationtalkradio.com every second and fourth Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. We are at the precipice of one of the most exciting evolutions in human history. On Cafe of Delights, you will hear from those that are actively working at the edges of local, regional, and global transformation. For more information on hope for a new reality, visit Gale West at successwithsoul.com. Hello, we are back on the Cafe of Delights. I'm your host, Gale West, and I have with me Dr. Patrick MacManaway, who's been sharing his insight and wisdom on circular time as opposed to linear time and its influence on our lives. And Patrick, I'd love for you to go more into the idea of which you kind of hinted to right before we took a break about really allowing ourselves to begin to communicate with the beings that are alive all around us, that we don't necessarily see with our eyes, but we can sense. And stories of what you've done. I know that you have some incredible stories of transformation as far as how you've communicated and transformed people's farms and cities and whatever. So, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Gale. If I can share a story that Gale's familiar with, one of my favorites, but I think, and honestly, one of thousands at this point after 30 years in practice, but a very lovely story of plant communication on a farm in Gloucestershire in England. And this was a farm that I've been working with for a number of months. They called me in because they had a very high level of mastitis, inflammation in their dairy cows that was so bad that their milk was going sour, and the people buying their milk from them had fined them £1,000 and weren't going to take it anymore after another month if they didn't get it under control.
And mastitis it has to do with the what exactly is mastitis?
So mastitis, human beings, cows, it's an inflammation of the breast.
Okay.
And depending on the bedding, on the diet, on the circumstances of milking, cows are vulnerable to getting inflammation, infection into the into their teats, into the breast tissue, into the milk, and that's very carefully and closely monitored with a white cell count. Every liter of milk that we drink is carefully tested for this, along with tuberculosis and other diseases. And so it's the sort of Achilles heel for a dairy herd. And if the cows are stressed, or if the bedding or nutritional or milking practices are compromised, then that's the thing that shows up. So they got me in originally because of a white cell count of 450, which for a farmer is a big problem. It's supposed to be less than 100. And I found a problem with earth energies, in fact, running through the farm, very old farm, medieval farm, but new development, new housing estate, landscape disturbance, new construction upstream of one of their earth meridians, one of their dragon lines running through the farms had thrown the energy way off on the farm. And so literally in that regard, a simple process of earth acupuncture, fixing up, making the dragon happy rather than sad, was what was necessary there. And within 3 days, we got it under control. Under 100 was our target. I think we got it down to 90 in 3 days. And so that was good. And then I slightly had carte blanche, and we worked with the pastures. We worked with the herd, with the spirit of the cows, with the spirit of the fields, the spirit of the farm. They increased their milk yield. They increased their milk protein and fat content. Their pastures started supporting the animals better than ever before. They had the only green fields in a late spring drought in the whole neighborhood, so they were very happy about this. But the story to share was the last green pasture that they had in October, before going on to dry hay and stored feed for the winter, were 2 parallel fields of alfalfa, or lucerne, depending on which part of the world you're in, which is a plant with a very high nitrogen content, and cows sometimes run into trouble with a high nitrogen content in terms of its digestibility. So typically when cows are in an alfalfa or lucerne field, they pay very close attention to make sure they're not running into something called bloat. And bloat is a deadly disease or digestive condition where the cows are literally unable to metabolize the high protein content of the feed, and create gas in the rumen, from which point they can either expel it up or down, and they literally expand, blow up, and die. Terrible situation. So so these 2 fields, literally side by side, separated only by a stone wall, which is typical in that part of the world, planted same day, same seed, same equipment, same operator, looked identical to the eye, and the cattle were being regeneratively grazed in high density situation in sort of cricket pitch type strips. So they went across the first field, all was well. They went into the second field, and in the first strip, 7 out of a herd of 20 cows within 12-14 hours started showing signs of bloat, potentially lethal. And so Farmer John, very astute, pulled them out of the field, put them in the barn, drenched them with vegetable oil. No cows die in this story. They're all rescued from the situation, but he at that point could not put them back into this field because the crop clearly had moved into a state of indigestibility and lethal toxicity to the cows. So he called me to fix this up. And fortunately, I was nearby at the time. I was living literally 2-3 minutes from the farm, went across and sat and had a good old meditate in and with the field. And so just sharing the process, so sit in the field, enter into a grace state, deep, peaceful heart space, clear, open mind, and then include into my mind all of the intelligent agencies concerned with this. And as you know, Gale, connection with non-human species, effortless. Whatever we hold in our mind, our internal radio naturally creates the frequency rapport with. So we just think about a thing, and we think about it in a loving way, and we go into our heart and we express gratitude and love and think very specifically and clearly about the thing, and then we've got telepathic connection with it, whatever it might be. And so this process, loving gratitude, grace, and connect and bring into mind the spirit of the farm, spirit of the field, spirit of the cows, spirit of the soil, spirit of this crop, the alfalfa, and honestly, all divas, nature spirits concerned, celestial civil servants appropriate, and the goddess Bridget, who in the Celtic lands is responsible for domesticated animals, sheep and cows included. So the natural process of being in our heart and thinking of these things brings us into a telepathic rapport. And so I was sitting in the field, but in my mind, I was having a kitchen table chat, cup of tea, slice of cake, with spirit of place, spirit of farm, spirit of soil, spirit of plants, spirit of cows, and terrible cacophony, chaos. And what emerged apparent was that this particular field had not understood that it was in an agricultural context. So the first field that they'd grazed without trouble recognized that it had been planted in an agricultural context. Its job was to healthily feed cows, and that job being done, it would be replanted again next year, and that its participation in the cycle was based on its being a nutritional feed source. The second field did not have that awareness, thought that it was being predated by the cows, and had mobilized what are called secondary metabolites to protect itself. And so a plant's intelligence has what are called primary metabolites and secondary metabolites. And you or I, under stress, saber-toothed tiger shows up, what we do is run away quick as we can, go into a cave, go up a tree, run away. Plant can't run away. And so what it does is it mobilizes phenols, tannins, various chemicals that are toxic to whatever's predating it, whether that's a herbivore, a grazing animal, or an aphid, or a locust, or a fungus, or whatever it might be. And this is well recognized. And in fact, in South Africa, I've been told by agronomists working there that giraffes have to stalk acacia trees, which are their favorite food, from downwind, and then get in a nibble quick, because once the acacia trees recognize that they're being browsed, they instantly fill their leaves with tannins that make them disgusting and indigestible to giraffes. And because of the connective intelligence between trees, they tell all their friends and neighbors that do the same. And then it's game over for giraffes, and they have to go and stalk from downwind the next clump of acacia trees and get in as much browse as they possibly can, which I think is why giraffes move in that very slow and peaceful way, because they don't want to be spotted by the plants. The same is true in the northwest of the US. I learned from an ethnobotanist there that there's a ground cherry that can smell the presence of a human being, and it's utterly delicious if you can catch it. But if it knows that you're coming, it makes itself sour and disgusting. And so there, again, with this ground cherry, you literally have to creep up on the thing from downwind and harvest it quick before it knows you're there, because otherwise
That's wild.
it just makes itself disgusting and indigestible, and you wouldn't want to eat it, and there's no way you're going to sell it. So this is a capacity that plants naturally have, but it's discretionary, and it's at their own it's at their own desire. And so what was clear in his field of alfalfa was that the plants were in an attitude of thinking that the cows were a wild predator and were appropriately, for them, making themselves literally lethally toxic, so the cows would leave them alone. So the internal process of mind, and this is something that we can all do at any time, in any way, was just to hold the plant and all its associated intelligences in mind with love, and communicate with it in the imagination, which is our primary superpower. The imagination is the place where we communicate vibrationally with vibrational intelligences. It's our most critical and important organ of psyche, more important than lungs and liver and kidneys. The imagination is the place where, through thought and sharing of vision, sharing of feeling, sharing of ideation, sharing of conversation, we have these conversations with plant and animal, elemental, nature, spirit, plant, etc. So kitchen table job, explained the issue, asked with love and respect for the plant to support these cows, recognizing that that was why it had been planted, and it was hoped by the people that it would be nutritional and supportive, and that being so, it would reliably and in guarantee be planted again. And all this happens at the speed of thought, which is very quick. And so probably this all happened, in half the time that I've taken to tell the story. Maybe 90 seconds or a couple of minutes. Thoughts were exchanged, agreements were made, and the plants agreed to support the cows. So we then waited 12 hours. Cows went back into the field. And indeed, the plants had changed their physiological metabolism, and the cows thrived on them and were able to graze off the whole of the rest of the field and look fat and healthy and sleek, and no further trouble arose. So 3 steps back, this was a process that happened in my imagination in a meditative space, and clearly the plants heard me, understood me, had the capacity to respond, and chose to do so, and make themselves nutritious rather than toxic. It's a lovely story, and it's one of the basic and primary things that I do with farms, and that we do with gardens. But just as a sort of small scale to large scale note, very little of our food nowadays, again, we've done this for 6,500 years. We stopped doing it when husbandry became agricultural science. Most of our food now is grown without this awareness, without this communication, and the community level of allergies and sensitivities to food is quite extraordinary, certainly beyond anything that I think you or I grew up with. And I think what's happened, honestly, as well as whatever chemicals we're putting into plants that we then absorb through the plants, I think fundamentally our agriculture is rendering plants into a stress state where they literally make themselves lethally toxic to us, because we're not in collaborative conversation with them, and they don't know any better than to, duck and cover and try and protect themselves. And so it's a cool story, but I think at a global level, this is a bit fundamental in our food chain, is unless food is grown with loving communication, it really doesn't have the capacity. It's not set up to be properly nutritious to us.
So we're going to take a little break.
Yeah.
Oh my God, hold that thought. And I'd love to come back and really talk about how we can connect to ourselves, how we can actually shift our food. And I know you use blessings as a power tool. We'll talk about how to use blessings. So this is Gale West. You are at the Café of Delights, and I'm with my guest is Patrick MacManaway.
Imagine if you were truly flourishing, how would your financial expansion impact the world? Author of Money Come Dance With Me, Gale West is an internationally known speaker, creative catalyst, and business intuitive at Success with Soul. Work with Gale to create a new relationship with money as your friend. Link the soul of your business to the business of your soul with programs like Sacred Money Mastery, Akashic Records of the Soul, and more. To receive a healing money meditation, go to successwithsoul.com today.
Café of Delight. conversations that enlighten and inspire with me, your host, Gale West. Tune into transformationtalkradio.com every second and fourth Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. We are at the precipice of one of the most exciting evolutions in human history. On Café of Delights, you will hear from those that are actively working at the edges of local, regional, and global transformation. For more information on hope for a new reality, visit Gale West at successwithsoul.com. And we are back. This is Gale West, and we are on the Café of Delights. I have my guest, Patrick MacManaway. He's been telling stories about his connection to nature spirits and the spirits of plants and animals and place and land. So we were talking about how we can connect to these nature spirits ourselves. And so before we do that, I'd like for people to be able to connect with you. What is your website? How can people connect to you? And we'll, say that back at the end also.
Yes, website, very easy, just my name.com, patrickmacmanaway.com. And on that site, information, generally services and products. I do consultations, I teach classes. Some of the classes are online, some pay for, some free. And also there's a daily blessing service. And I'd love to talk about blessings as we go on with this this interview, Gale. But following on from my parents' work, they had a daily list of anybody who wanted to be blessed. And such people would put their name on a list, and then every day in the healing center, everybody in the list got a good and thorough blessing. And so I've perpetuated that practice, and so people can sign up on the website if they want to get daily blessed. It's a subscription thing. You can have it for free, or you can pay as much as you want for it, but it's open to everybody, and it's there. Well,
this idea, go ahead.
No, just I would love in our time available to talk about the technology of blessings and grace, because I think it's a bit central to everything, really.
Well, it's central to your work, I know. Blessings and love are the two superpowers that you use, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So people know about love, because so when you send love, do you just send love from your heart? Did you what's the process you use to connect and send love? And then what do you feel that blessings are? I think of blessings as an activator, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yes. So so when we share, project, intend simple love without agenda or intention, I think in my mind, in my definition, that's a blessing. So if I'm blessing you, Gale, I'm projecting, I'm holding you in mind, I'm holding you in love, and nothing more than that. Mm-hmm. And so the superpower of love that I have then surrounds, encompasses, supports, activates you. There's a state of grace which is perceived and felt, but is also mathematically defined and mathematically measurable. And spectrum analysis of heart and brain electrophysiologically shows us an association between the golden ratio and the love gray state. And when we're in a gray state, it puts us into a space where simultaneously and altogether we have gratitude, love, truth, clarity, strength, beauty, courage, all of these together, a bit like a sort of Microsoft Office suite. You get, Word and Entourage and PowerPoint and I don't know what else all comes together. But once we're in that space, all of these capacities are activated, and it is our most natural internal state, and it is our perfect relationship with the universe. I think that the purpose of a human incarnation as part of an eternal process of evolution of a human soul, two projects. The first is to learn to love more simply and to learn to more simply love, and then to learn to use our free will wisely, because we do have that contract with the universe and we do manifest whatever we hold in mind. So those are the two things, and they go together, but they're also distinct. So when we bless something, we're simply and purely loving it without intention or agenda, just for the sake of loving it. And we know this because we experience it when we are simply and truly loved, it allows the true essence of ourself to feel safe, to be empowered, and to be expressed. So pure love allows our deep self, soul self, eternal self to be supported, to be safe, to be expressed, and to be present. Mm-hmm. The story that I shared with you before, that's the place that we start. We get into a pure love state with the thing that we're communicating with, in that case, plants and alfalfa and cows. Once we've got that rapport, it was good to bless the alfalfa, but I also needed for the alfalfa to come into an agreement to support the nutrition of cows. And so that was a conversation that occurred on top of a blessing. And happily, it agreed with me. But to distinguish that intentional, specific communication, I love you and you're lovely and bless you for being alfalfa, that's a blessing. And then separately and additionally, would you please nourish these cows? Because that's, our human need and desire. So to distinguish a blessing of pure love, which just allows a thing to be completely empowered in its natural inner truth beauty state and expressed as such, and to always do that first. And frankly, in a healing practice, often that's really the only thing that's necessary, because if a thing feels completely loved, it kind of just sorts itself out. Once it's there, then we can have conversations about relationship and agreements about, collaboration, cooperation, which are, material and necessary if we're to be in the world in the ways that we are. But to hold a distinction between a blessing of simple and pure love with no agenda, just because we're all in it together, and that's what makes life flow, versus additionally having specific communications of need, want, desire, and specific categories of relationship, agreement, etc., beyond that. So I think, yes.
Have you found that that the nature spirits are willing to? So we always think of them as something out there, but what you're saying is we can communicate, we can negotiate, we can ask them to support us, and more often than not, they're willing to do that. Is that right?
I have found universally that we live by their grace and favor. They like us. We're part of the mix. They yearn for us to be in conversation with them, as we always used to do. and always were, and that they just need to understand what our needs are, and then to the degree that they can, their nature is to support us. And so when we're not in that communicative relationship, we're mostly hurting ourselves, because we're separating ourselves literally from our source.
Yeah.
And we sort of think of elementals and nature spirits as being out there, but actually you and I are, built from stardust and elementals, and we're mostly water with a bit of earth, air, and fire mixed in. And so there's actually no difference between outside and inside, except the membrane of skin. That there isn't really an inside and outside. We're distinct, but we are part of and made from.
Right.
And so it's within us as well as outside of us, and it's the most natural state, I think, to be in relationship with. And they just seem to yearn and love to be talked to be communicated with. They have to, suck up whatever we do and compensate if we're not doing it well. They seem infinitely gracious and generous. And so I don't think that human beings are, a bad or, destructive force necessarily. I think, as said before, it's really all about relationship and communication, and remembering that they're sentient, they're proactive, and they really just want to understand our thinking. I think from an elemental perspective, the cognitive thinking, so-called beta state of our mind is slightly outside of their frequency range. What they recognize is our feelings and our dreamings. And so when we think about the water, the lake, the river, when we think about the soil, the plant, and allow our heart, mind, body, spirit to go into that space, then we can communicate with them. If we're thinking in abstractions or in pure intellect, then we tend to disconnect. And that, I think, culturally is what's happened, is we've moved into a sort of philosophical state of thinking about them rather than thinking with them, talking about them rather than talking to them. Yeah.
Well, and I think what you're
so
talking
natural.
about is that, Indigenous cultures still are connected to all things, and believe that all creation has sentient energy. But in the Western world, we have disconnected from that knowing. I think some of it has to do with.
We have, but very recently, Gale. Our history as Europeans, this was what we always did. It's very recent. We're Indigenous too. The separation is something that's happened in time rather than in cultural space. So some of the deepest and most accessible, and particularly the sophisticated agricultural communications, because Australia, North America, permaculture, hunting, gathering, communications between the indigenous and landscape. But the Europeans had an agricultural communication with landscape,
right? Yeah.
For thousands of years. So we don't want to associate Western culture with post-industrial intellectual rationalism. We've had that always, because otherwise we wouldn't be on the planet. And unless we get back to it, our time is, probably a bit limited. So that's a thing that I think is important for people to remember is, if you're of European ancestry, your ancestors did this absolutely imperatively for hundreds of thousands of years. This isn't something that only applies to non-Europeans. This is our European heritage, and for cultural and political and religious reasons, 200-300 years ago there was a split and a separation. But this is our inherited cultural tradition, and profound and deep. And as we started, this gave us 6,500 years of agriculture, and before that we were hunters and gatherers, for 500,000 years before that. So it's in our bones and blood. It's in everybody's bones and blood. And the imperative is, whoever you are, wherever you live, you need to do this now, yesterday and tomorrow, because this is literally what creates a sustainable relationship with place, whoever you are and wherever you live, in whatever time period you find yourself in, and whatever culture you happen to be. So this isn't something of other people elsewhere. This is everybody's, always. Yeah.
And this is this is Patrick MacManaway. I'm so excited to have you, and you're on the Café of Delights. And tell people again how to get a hold of you.
Yes, easiest through the website, patrickmacmanaway.com, and you can sign up to be blessed daily. You can connect with me if you'd like, either to join a class or have one-on-one coaching or consultations, either online or on site. And it is my great delight to share and spread the love, as I think is what you're up to as well, Gale. So thank you so much for including me in the global project of reestablishing love and grace in the world.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And again, we meet the second and fourth Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and this is the Café of Delights. Thank you for tuning in to Café of Delights, conversations that enlighten and inspire, with me, your host, Gale West. Listen or watch live every second and fourth Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com for a series of riveting interviews from those who are actively working at the edges of local, regional, and global transformation. From science to spirituality, culture, arts, and new economies, and more, we will explore how to create a world where all can thrive. For more information on hope for a new reality, visit me, Gale West, at successwithsoul.com.